there's lots of men who've had an experience of men's work, whether it's a retreat or listening to a podcast or reading a book that changed your complete mindset, or some combination of all of those things. Maybe a brother of yours said, hey, trust me, come do this thing. There's lots of guys who've had that experience, and yet there's only a few who actually take that and advance it forward and say, hey, what about the guys who don't have this yet? And everybody here is a man in some way who has looked in the rearview mirror, not even the rearview mirror. You've actually turned around and reached your hand out and said, hey, who else wants to come along for this ride? All right. Whew. Wow. We just had a whole nice warm-up introduction before I hit record, and I'm looking at you guys on the screen and really just feeling the power and the privilege of being on a call with you gentlemen here. As I explained to you guys, and for those people who are going to be listening to this is all part of a vision of bringing the most important leaders that I know into the same room to talk about the one mission that we all share and care about, the mountain that we're all climbing separately, and the things that we're seeing. Because at the end of the day, we all care about helping men to heal, helping men to grow, empowering men to be the best versions of themselves at a time when so many of us have had to struggle to find our way. And so I'm grateful to have you men here. For the audience who's listening who may not know all of you or any of you, we're going to do a brief round of introductions. So why don't we start with Adam? If you would please just say your name, the organization you represent, and then briefly, what was your entry point into men's work?
Thank you, Jetty. Thank you for having us all here. Adam Jackson checking in. I'm the co-founder of Sacred Sons. We were formed in 2018. I'm also the host of the Sacred Sons podcast. And Sacred Sons is about bringing brotherhood to the forefront of our community as a means for healing, as a means for connection, and as a means to initiate men into this world, into this modern world, into this now time. What got me into men's work is I was going through it, and I found myself at a time in my life where I didn't have brothers that I could lean on, that I could even really go to in an honest way. You know what I mean? Like, for a lot of men, it's very difficult to even find spaces to be fully honest in. And so Spirit showed me, if I can't find it, I have to create it. And so that's what I did with a few brothers. And since that time, we have welcomed over 10,000 men into in-person experiences. We've impacted millions of people through our online presence and through normalizing, showing what men's work can look like. And I know that back in the day, it might have looked one way with a bunch of dudes in ponchos out in the desert. You know, that was the time. And broadly, this work has now reached all throughout North America, Europe, Australia. And I'm so honored to be a torch carrier of this work, as the rest of you men are. And it's truly an honor. So thank you for having me here today, Jetty.
Honored to have you here, Adam. Yeah, grateful. Thank you for introducing yourself. Let's kick it over to Voy. Voy, please go ahead, introduce yourself and tell us what your entry point was.
Absolutely. Voy checking in, co-founder of Modern Renaissance Man. And MRM is essentially a movement that's empowering men to master themselves and create the life they love. In other words, we help men get out of their own way so they can thrive in life, relationships, and their business and career. And the way that I got into men's work was actually through a place of judgment. I was a lone wolf. I felt like I had to do everything myself. And I grew up in New Jersey and New York, where the energy is kind of like a dog-eat-dog mentality, right? So I saw men as threats. And while I was working in the corporate space, I saw this one man who I always thought was a threat. And that day when I had this feeling, I saw the quote from Abraham Lincoln, and it said, "I don't like this man. I must get to know him better." And this man walked into the kitchen one day at work. I looked at him and I was like, you know what? What's up, bro? And this guy just started jamming out. We started talking and he's like, hey man, I'm starting a book club. I know you're into like performance and mindset. Would you want to join? I said, sure, why not? I'm going to follow this intuitive hit and this quote. And when I went to this book club, I was the only man that actually showed up. And I was about to leave, but I decided to stay. And this book club was actually masked as the men's group, which this man invited me to. And that completely shifted my whole reality of what men are in this world, what kind of relationships we can develop, and how we can actually support each other and be seen beyond our achievements. And that little session with this man whose name is Jose actually sparked the idea for Modern Renaissance Man. And here we are 5 years later, offering online personal development programs, experiences in person, like rites of passage, men's groups, events, and so forth. So it's an honor and a blessing to be here with all you fellas and have this conversation with the brothers. So Jetty, thank you for the invitation, bro. The pleasure.
Yeah, man. Absolutely. Shout out to Jose Alejandro. He's the reason that I know you as well, Voy, co-founder of MRM. Yeah, I told you guys, I made you guys box it out to see who was going to get to be on this call. So I'm glad you caught him with that right hook.
You can't see the black eye, bro, but I put in the work.
All right, Brian, my main man, Brian, please.
Yeah. Well, first off, I just love hearing your men's stories behind, on your journeys. And I know that each one of us has so much more we could say about our journeys. We're given the absolute Cliff Notes versions. My version. So my name is Brian Reeves, Brian with a Y, Reeves. I always clarify that because people always get it wrong. I'm an author. Let's see. I have a podcast called Men This Way. That was born out of a sacred pact I made with a friend a number of years ago when we gathered together on a mountain retreat because we were two men who were successful in our lives and so lonely, so disconnected from each other. And we were lifelong friends and we still felt lonely and disconnected. But I came through the military. I was in the Air Force for 10 years. I was a captain in the Air Force. I was very educated. I got a master's degree. I was an engineer as well, electrical engineer. I know, Adam, I think you had shared before we started recording that you also were a mechanical engineer, I think. Well, I was an electrical engineer in the Air Force and just miserable. I was so disconnected from my body. I also grew up in a part of my family system. There's a kind of spiritual fundamentalism, like a religious fundamentalism that rather than take me into my body, just took me out even more. So much of what I experienced as a kid, there was alcoholism in my home and a lot of anger and suppressed rage. And oh man, it was just a fucking mess. So come 26, I get spit out of the military. I can't feel a thing. I am so dead inside, so educated, accomplished, got all the things a man could want, and fucking miserable. And I hit bottom big time. And it was a beautiful bottom. I didn't know it was a bottom, but that was about 25 years ago. I'm 50 now. And so especially the last decade has really been a deep dive into not just personal growth work, but what does it mean to be a man to me? Right. One of the big existential kind of crises I've had was, Adam, you talked about looking around and not having brothers. I actually had really interesting men in my life at this time, but I had no elders. I had no, and not that I was connecting with my brothers that much either, right? Still lone wolfing it, like you're talking about, Voy. Still lone wolfing it, despite having some beautiful relationships with men, still carrying my burdens alone, and then no elder men to talk to. Anyway, this was all born, I know for a lot of us in some way, it was born out of pain and born out of not having a choice. It's like either just die or just live the rest of my life miserable, or say yes to a bigger, deeper calling. And I started in relationship coaching, which the last 5 years or so turned into really focusing on men, which I resisted every step of the way. Because of my own daddy issues, my own distrust of men issues. But boy, as I've done this work working with men, I have fallen in love with men. I so love the heart of men, and I love gathering with men. I don't know most of you men just yet, but man, I can just feel the potency and the beauty and the richness and the depth just in this space. So I'm glad to be here. It's a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Glad to have you here, man. Blase, my brother from down under, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
What's up, guys? Blase Grinner from Australia, Sunshine Coast. The man, Jetty Zuma, he was actually one of my very first mentors. Jetty Zuma and Preston Smiles back 8 years ago. So I did my very first ever men's thing with Pete and Alex. Oh, so it was a personal development workshop. And I opened wide up because I was a lone wolf on personal development. I studied Buddhism for 3 years. I was on that search of connection. Then I found personal development was amazing. And then the men's work piece was that component that I was deeply missing, which was I didn't know that it was missing, but a sense of belonging to a brotherhood and a tribe. So I had close mates, but it's all based on cocaine and prostitutes, all that kind of stuff. But this depth of Preston and Jetty showed me, it's like, man, after that first man cave, like raised my hand, it's like, hey, how do I get involved with this? I want to be part of it. And then, got a call from Pete a couple of months later. He's like, hey, let's make this a movement. And several of us, I think it's about 10 of us, created Conscious Man Brotherhood, which was amazing. It was like my purpose. And then the start of my journey really deeply in the men's work was I had this amazing online brotherhood with thousands of men that were helping and support. But I became a dad. It was really beautiful, the reflection we had before, all of us men sharing. I remember that was my entry level too, Adam. I was becoming a father. And I'm like, holy fuck, I'm so nervous about this. I got all these stresses and challenges, and P and Jetty were so far away in the States. I'm like, fuck, I've got to create a men's circle or something here on the coast. So I did. It was called Dads and Dads to Be. And very quickly, it went from, in 6 months, 500 men locally. And I was just, man, this work's so needed. Men need a place to share and soundboard and come back to each week. So we did that for like several years, and then COVID happened. And through COVID, that's where I deeply got connected to Spirit, and Spirit showed me Blokes Venture, which is now this thing that I've run like 18 times, and gathered some other men as well to help the cause. And we've created a movement called MindFit Men's Movement. And so MindFit for us, it was actually a word gifted to me from my wife. She's a personal trainer, but when I saw her, the way that she trained people, I'm like, man, you're not a personal trainer. You fuck with people's heads and get in their psychology and their emotional being. She's, I call it MindFit. I'm like, well, men need this. Men need to be MindFit. So let's create a gym, the MindFit gym. So men know that, hey, you want big muscles, you go to the gym. You want to strengthen this thing, the mind, let's come into the MindFit gym. But it's also not about connecting to this. Our ethos is like taking the men on that longest journey of their life, which is 16 inches, which is a quote that Jetty taught me, out of their head and into their heart. And that's what we do in many, many various ways. So, yeah, brothers, beautiful to be here. One other thing I'd just like to put as a side note too, I don't sound it, but I'm actually Maori. I was born in New Zealand. My mum's Maori. And so culture has this deep reverence to me. And I came to Australia when I was 4, and Aboriginal culture almost got wiped out. And I had this deep reverence of why. And I go back to New Zealand and see all this culture, this so in your face and so like celebrated. I think as a white man, I think culture has been definitely lost. And I think something that you said, Voy, and Adam said before, is this men's work is a new way of culture for men. That it's okay to have brothers. And I think this is that deep sense of why we're gathering here, is to recreate culture and what that looks like in a modern sense, because I think this is that, like, we're gathering the tribes. Let's create this new culture. And I definitely want to be part of that. So with that, brothers, I'm in.
Oh, thank you, Blase. Honored to have you here, man. Last but not least, Allan, please go ahead and introduce yourself, bro.
What's up, guys, and everybody listening? My name's Allan McGrath. I represent 13 Pines, which is a venture that I've co-founded with 3 brothers of mine. We've been around the last year, so we're newer, but we're going strong. And our goal is really to initiate men into conscious masculinity. And that has come as a result of about 10 years of being in this work. I found this world, much like the rest of you, out of my own pain and suffering and feeling alone. And I was a bit of a late bloomer. I was really just confused around how to relate with people with the kind of depth that I wanted to relate to them with. And for all intents and purposes, I had a really beautiful childhood, a beautiful dad, beautiful mother, happy marriage. But I just felt like there was something I was missing. And I found meditation at 15, and that totally changed my path, and was kind of like a closet yogi through school. That's what I was really interested in. Did my first long time retreat right after graduating college and did my next one right after that. And I was like, okay, if I could do this, like I'm good, I'm set. I just need to fucking meditate 2 hours a day and life will be golden. But along the way, I realized that I had missed some kind of initiation that I don't know why I knew I needed, but I felt like I should have received it. Should I have been born in another time, another culture? And so I sought it out and found myself at one of those conscious California festivals, as one does in their early 20s. And there was a workshop on the schedule called the men's initiation workshop. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to that. I don't know what that means or what that is, but I'm going. And it was there that I met my first teacher, Zot. And I just haven't stopped since. I kind of started working with him one-on-one and was slowly invited into leadership by guys like him, and very lucky to have Brian in that process as well. And it's been quite a journey that's taken lots of different turns. But I spent really the first 7 years of my time just focusing on men and working with men and being in the trenches with them and learning what it meant to be to not just think about masculinity, but actually embody it. And to bring the sort of spiritual traditions that I had been learning as a kid to life, to the world, like not to monkhood, but to the body and to relationship and to women, to other men. And that has just been my calling and my deepest fulfillment since finding it. And now it's taken the form of 13 Pines and the work that I do with couples and with women. And I feel very honored to be a part of this group here. So thank you, Jetty, for the invite.
Yeah, man. Thank you for being here. Thank all of you guys for being here. There's so much work to do out there in the world. And I know for myself, this is the first time that I've called together leaders from other organizations to have a conversation. I'm sure there's other conversations that have been had, but how often do the Knights of Camelot come together and speak at the round table about what's going on? And so all the folks at home who are listening, I just want to emphasize, whether this is you're like, what is this men's work thing? Or you've been listening for a while, there's a lot of men who go out and experience men's work. I wanted to start off with the individual stories of these men because I hope that you see yourself in one or maybe all of these men. That's the thing, is that none of us are special or unique in the way that we got here. We all have perhaps a unique story or plot line, but we all experience the same challenges. And I realized as I was listening to you guys that there's lots of men who've had an experience of men's work, whether it's a retreat or listening to a podcast or reading a book that changed your complete mindset, or some combination of all of those things. Maybe a brother of yours said, hey, trust me, come do this thing. There's lots of guys who've had that experience, and yet there's only a few who actually take that and advance it forward and say, hey, what about the guys who don't have this yet? And everybody here is a man in some way who has looked in the rearview mirror, not even the rearview mirror. You've actually turned around and reached your hand out and said, hey, who else wants to come along for this ride? So we're going to do something somewhat experimental, and I trust you guys to navigate it here. We're just going to open it up as though we're having a conversation right now. Like the mic's in the middle, and we're going to open up a dialogue to see what is the significance of that, of the calling of certain men to step forward into that leadership. Whether it's your experience or what you observe, where some men step forward into that, and where do we go with that as a community? Adam, why don't you go ahead and kick it off there?
Yeah, man. What's coming up for me is one of the first teachings that I ever got through a man called Hawk Moon. And it was in the first sweat lodge I ever sat in. And it's whenever we let go of something, we have to replace it. Otherwise, that thing comes right back in. And so when I'm hearing these stories from all of you men of like, man, I found this through pain, I found it through my addiction or my recovery process, it's like, when we are going through radical transformation in our lives, it takes a radical action to replace the thing that we want to let go of. You know, there's a lot of talk about like, oh, I'm just going to let this go. I'm going to let this behavior go, this old pattern, this old life. But then what are you going to replace it with? And that's the piece of, we're doing something very radical by replacing the thing we left behind whether that's coming from like debaucherous culture, whether that's coming from burnout culture and corporate, which many of us come from corporate. We're replacing it with an honor-based culture. We're replacing it, and in my case, I was replacing it with getting honest with men. That's a radical thing in a culture that promotes us to ego check each other and to like, boast and brag and all those things. It's like we're replacing it with honor-based culture versus the pride-based. And I think it takes something that radical to make these life transformations, actually to not only from the journey from head to heart, the journey from boyhood to manhood, that journey, it has to be a radical act. And that's what we call initiation. That's what we call rites of passage. And so that's what I'm throwing in there. It's like, it's not going to be easy, men who are listening, and it shouldn't be. And in my case, I did read the books. I didn't find it in a book. I found it when I came eye to eye, heart to heart with a man who I resonated with, who I thought I had nothing in common with. Those moments are so deeply profound and impactful that they open up new aspects of who we are able to become and what we're capable of.
Yeah. Thank you. Brian, go ahead.
Again, as I listen to our stories in our introduction, we're also responding to a void. Each of us is rushing to fill a void. Like life doesn't tolerate a vacuum, a void. Something flows into that space. The ecosystem, right? Something dies, something else arises in its space. And I think, to your point, Adam, as well, it's like that void is going to be filled with lots of stuff that don't matter. To us as men, as humans, that we don't actually, our souls don't actually aspire to necessarily. A lot of addiction, a lot of pursuit just for the sake of achievement. Whether or not it serves the community is irrelevant. Does it serve my ego? Do I survive, et cetera? Survival mind. I think a lot of us were responding to a call because there's a void. There's a void in men's lives. I mean, I don't think I know a man. Even us men in this work, we have our times where it's like, shit, we're going through something. And fortunately, we're doing the work to resource ourselves with other men, particularly, right? That we can trust, that we can turn to. Even us men in this work will sometimes have that temptation to lone wolf it, to, no, I got this. I don't actually need to talk about this. I got this, to kind of bear that burden by ourselves. Before we were in that work, men that aren't in this work, they are not resourced in these ways. There's a painful void. And I think, what we hear in this little Camelot collection are stepping into this little Knights of the Round Table. It's like we're responding to that void. And it's kind of like, well, if not me, then who? If not me, then who? And I there was a time early in this work where, again, my own fragility would have been threatened by other men doing this work because, well, what about me? My own fragility, that lone wolf mindset, I think that a lot of us men carry. It's like, I'm responsible. I'm the only one responsible for my well-being and for my success. And if I don't crush it, if someone else crushes it better than me, that takes from me. Right. Whereas now it's like, as become more resource, it's like I look out and I see you guys and I'm like, thank God there are other men stepping in to fill this void, because the world is starving. Men are starving. And we just, we're saying, let's all feast together. So.
Yeah. I love that, man. As I'm listening to the two of you guys share, I think of things through the model of a rites of passage, the way that I was taught, that there's a death and a rebirth. There's a dying of an identity and a rebirth into a new chapter, a new season of our lives. And I think that that's something that every man must find and identify for himself. What is that step forward? What is that vacuum or void that is uniquely whispering in my ear and calling me forward into it? For some of us, it's stepping forward into the leadership that we've all assumed responsibility for, and expecting that is going to continue to evolve and unfold. I mean, that's how it's been for me. I didn't start off thinking that I was going to someday be leading a whole men's organization or even leading conversations like this. I just wanted to talk to other men about what was the experience they were having. And I wanted more men to have the opportunity to say what was true for them at a fundamental level. And I think one of the important pieces of sharing our experience, especially from men who have been in the trenches, we've seen just about everything. You know, I hesitate to say that because there's always something that comes up that still surprises me, but we've seen a lot, haven't we? And just the reminder that we get to be that no matter how long you've been doing this for, I've got guys in my men's team who are 70 years old, and I ask them, does it ever stop? Do the challenges get easier? Do the waves stop coming? They're like, nope, they just look different. Same waves, crash over you. So I'm just grateful to be in the company of men who I see climbing this mountain. And I think it's important that we talk about the natural competitiveness we have as men, right? That thing that makes us into those lone wolves, whether the world has led us to believe that, or it's something inside of us, or both, that makes us look down our own lane and sometimes prevents us from tapping into the thing that we do best, which is take down the woolly mammoth together. So I'll cut myself off there. I saw you raise your hand, Blaze. Blaze, did you have your hand up before? Let's go Blaze and then Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to carry on a piggyback off Adam and Brian around like the yearning and the cry that the world has. And I really hear that very loudly from the women. And like what Adam said, we're going to put one thing down, we're going to pick something up. And so the feminist movement was like, it needed to happen. And now I feel that's getting put down. But the men are picking that torch up now. It's like, hey, we need to lead as well. But there's this beautiful thing is like we're doing it for the sake of our children and the women. And these cycles have been generational or 1.5 generational cycles of like that. Like what's next? What for our kids when we're not here? If men are stepping into their purpose and finding their calling, and whether it doesn't have to be leading leadership like men's work, but leading themselves, leading their families, and having a meaningful existence, not just surviving. I think that's been the biggest cry, man. And I much like you, Adam, like some of having these good quality men in my life has been a direct impact of why my marriage is so beautiful. Like the first time I locked eyes with another man and saw a soul, it broke me because I realized I'd never looked at my wife like that, ever. And men were gifted me that. And now I get to pass that on. And that's just one essence. But that yearning and crying in the void, and I really feel that it's not just from men, it's from the world. The world, humanity needs us men to grab it by the horns and be the pillar, be the avatar, be the sculpture that these young boys get to look at and like, hey, that's what it means to be a man. Because it's really stifled at the moment. Oh, women have to be very masculine and boss mamas and career driven. And then men got to be more emotional and vulnerable. But where do we sit right now? I think this is why we're recreating that, redefining what does it mean to be man, or remodeling what is masculinity. Because at the moment, it's pretty grey. And I'd like to be part of this story for all of us to like, can we emulate something for these children to come in this world and like, hey, I know what it means to be a man right now. I can have my place in this society. So yeah, man, I want to be part of that for sure.
Beautiful. Thank you, man. Adam?
Yeah, Blaze, I'm all for the big vision, like the cultural change that is afoot as a result of this work. And that's what's different about this work. It's not necessarily personal development. It's collective evolution that's happening. That's what I experience at these gatherings and at these trainings. And we are training because there's a lack of relational education that we receive as young men. And that's why Sacred Sons has a youth program, Sons Youth. It's like really the only way, I like to give that Frederick Douglass quote. It's easier to raise strong boys than to repair broken men. You talked about we see a lot, Jetty. And in these youth and the young men coming up, they're holding a lot. And they need us. That's the culture that I'm here to be a part of. Like not the one that takes from the next generation, the one that offers mentorship to the next generation. The thing that we didn't have. I know I can look at this screen. I'm coming from America. I was born in Dayton, Ohio. I'm coming from WWF and rappers and rock stars. That was who I looked up to, straight up. And so this lack of the cultureless culture that we got to be a part of there's a yearning that's in some of our bones that's like, no, there's more. There is actually more to this life and who we are and who we can become. And I think it's so important to keep that in mind as a part of this, that really what's happening is we're bringing back things that are intuitive, that make us human, these pieces, these initiations that I lacked in my upbringing, and passing them on for the next generation. Like, this is the long game. This is not for short-term gains. This is the long game. This is like that. At least that's the vision I have. I'm curious if you other men see it that way as well.
Yeah, let's let that question sit on the floor for a moment.
You want to go into what you've seen?
Yeah, well, there's context to all of this. You know, the theme for this series that we're doing here right now is about becoming men that people will trust. We put some thought into that, at least on the Rising Man side of things, because there's a lot of different ways that we help men. And we were like, well, what's the tip of that pyramid? What is the thing that captures all of it? And for us, it's becoming a man that people will trust. There's a lot that goes into becoming that type of man, but when we become men that are trustworthy, that people invest their trust into, it's often a result of all of these other things that we care about. So I want to bring that context, and with the question that you had asked, Adam, I want to pull in Voy, and wherever you want to go with this, man, but in that vein of trust and what Adam was sharing, what's on your heart, bro?
Yeah, thank you for pulling me in, bro. And when I think about trust, for me, trust is when I really step into the arena and I allow myself to go through some kind of experience that then builds that confidence within myself to know that I got it. Right. And I love what Adam brought around culture, because I grew up in the culture right before the internet came. And obviously I'm here now when the internet became prolific, and the internet brought this weird perception of what a man should be. And when I look at the human being, there's only two things that we do. We either move away from pain or we're moving towards pleasure. And because of the internet and social media, this perception of constantly moving towards pleasure, I feel, has been influencing men to go for the external things, which then creates this vicious cycle of it never being enough. More cars, more money, more women, whatever the case is. And what I realized in my journey that allowed me to build more trust was actually moving towards the pain. Right. And there's this beautiful example that one of my teachers gave me around the water buffalo, where whenever the storm comes, instead of going away from the storm, the buffalo know that the fastest way is to go right into the storm. Right. So for me, developing trust was going through and into the pain, which allowed me to understand that I got it. And the best way to do that, I found, was doing in a community of men who are doing it with me. Right. So with community, with men speaking about challenges and going into the storm and leaning into the pain, we've all started to cultivate purpose and allowed ourselves to go deeper into this way of being through that, which I feel has allowed us to build trust, not only within ourselves, but within each other. And then that translated into the world. Right. Because I do believe this work is important, and it's amazing to do it in brotherhood. But the real work actually happens when we step out of the men's container and go out into the world. Right? It's always nice and fun to be in brotherhood and do that work, but it truly is potent, and the real work happens when we step out. And that's where I feel like we step into the arena to build the trust, and then take that trust out into the world and cultivate that level of purpose, presence, and what you're speaking to, leadership.
So when we carve underneath the surface a little bit, right? So far, you guys have done such an incredible job of speaking to the things I think so many men will relate to. When we get underneath it, though, when we really lift up the hood and we see what's going on the ground level, what are you guys seeing? What's really at the heart of the matter of this thing that we're all called and compelled to do in supporting men? Allan, I wanted to pull you in and see if you got something to say on that.
Sure. I mean, well, one of the big obvious ones is just having, or rather the lack of having, trustworthy men in a man's life. Like, that's the one thing that we all lack that brought us to this work. And that's the thing that I see pretty much across the board in every man that I've ever worked with, is very few say, like, yeah, I've got men in my life who see me for who I am and my light and my shadows. And I trust them to call me forward. I trust them to call me out. And, you know, not only do they not have that in their peers, they'd never had that from their fathers. And so a part of that void that we're filling, I think, in the modern men's movement is like creating men who can be that thing for other men because they lacked it. And I really, Voy's piece on like moving towards pleasure instead of pain. Like, yeah, that's particularly for men of my generation, like pleasure was so accessible. There was no need to go into the pain that one felt out of loneliness or isolation or misunderstanding or shame. Like you could be easily distracted. And now it's just increasing more and more. And so I think what is happening under the hood is like men feel alone. They don't have men around them that actually see them for who they are in their, you know, their shadows and their goal that they have in them. And they're surrounded by the pleasures of comfort that keep them in that kind of shallow, isolated state. And they don't have anybody around them to say like, oh no, man, like there's something more here for you. There's something available here. And that's why it usually takes a crisis, right? It takes, what did the Greeks call it? A catabasis, right? Like a whack over the head to wake a man up. And that, you know, looks like a divorce or some health scare or some massive change in their life that goes like, oh, fuck, man, something needs to change. And then they start searching. They They don't quite know what to do, where to go. And that's where I think, you know, we're moving towards is creating a culture where men know, oh, there is this thing called men's work or whatever it is you want to call it. And that might be a place to find some real nutrients because the souls of men are starved. Like they're really starved. Terrence McKenna has a fucking banger quote that says, essentially that, you know, you've been fed a world that's based on like bones. You've been fed a world based on bones, and like it's not going to provide you the nutrients that it sells itself to be providing. And turning towards our pain alongside men who we trust, who can take us farther than we could ever go on our own, seems to be our best shot at moving forward in a good way. And I think that's what we're all kind of up to.
Yeah. And I think that that's what ultimately unlocks the lives that we dream of when we're boys, whether we see something in the WWF and in the athletes and the superstar, there's still something essential in that we do want, that is healthy, right? A life of our own, a life by our design, a life on our terms. And it's a lot of the things that you were just mentioning, Allan, that I think allow that to be possible. And so I think sometimes it's hard to help men see the course of things, because it's not like baking a cake. It's not a recipe. I'm sure you guys can relate that when we're doing the work that we're talking about, we're not following a formula necessarily. It's intuitive, it's instinctual, it's basic on a level that the body has to feel and intuit. And for men, that's like you were saying before, Blase, that's one of the hardest things is we're not encouraged to be connected to the emotional body and the physical body, the somatic body in the same way anymore. I'm going to come over to you, Blase, because I saw your hand up, and then we'll swing over to Brian and Adam after that.
Yeah, man. I'd like to touch on like what's under the hood as something that I saw missing and lacking, and it's something that where actually men's work is doing is underneath that hood, that accountability piece. And what's lacking is that ownership and responsibility. And we're talking about that from boy to man. Something you taught me, Jetty, is that becoming a conscious man is when we take that ownership and responsibility. But that accountability, I think, or lack of, is what's really fed into why men don't trust each other. Because if we're not accountable for our actions, for the way we treat and the way men have climbed over each other, but there's also for ourselves, those 1%ers, that integrity of men. Hey, honey, I'm going to go fix that fence. And 6 months later, the fence isn't done. The psyche that's going to do to our ego of like, hey, we can't follow through on our word. I think that men's work is amazing because ultimately I think that men have lost trust for themselves. And that's why they've lost trust in each other. And the way that I see it to be rebuilt is that Mental work's beautiful because we offer each other mirrors. And so if we can build that trust back in within brotherhood, maybe through that feeling of strength of good men around us, then we can start looking within ourselves and then start trusting ourselves again. And then through doing so, trusting ourselves, being integral to our word, going, what Voy said, going back and taking that medicine back into the everyday life. I personally know that I need to be held accountable. It's really easy just to slip back into the groove of like, but yeah, and having good solid man, hey man, you're showing up to your values, you're showing up to your vision. You said you're this man, and you're not being that. That piece is so crucial, like so crucial. And I think that is going to take away that lone wolf of having some good accountability so that we can take ownership responsibility. Adam, you're going to jump in with that one, man.
Well, let's hit Brian and then we'll get over to Adam on that. Thanks, Blase.
Coming back to that question that you posed to Allan, what was leaping out for me as Allan was sharing about, again, men not having trustable men. One of the first sentences that I hear men say when they start to have an epiphany, when they come into like one of my spaces, like a group of men, and not even just individual coaching, but like in a group. There's something magic about a group that's different than you get one-on-one. One of the first things I so often hear is, wow, it feels so good to know I'm not alone. That I got frameworks for days. Jetty, you said something about following these agendas and these roadmaps, and we all have those. I got frameworks for fucking days. I created a whole model called the 5 Pillars of a Thriving Man. I run guys through that. I work with men for a year on that. But you know what? That's all fine and fun and valuable, and certainly it's accountability, like you were talking about, Blase, so important. And though just that first part. It's so good to know I'm not alone. Whoa, like a lifetime of pain and tension and contraction begins to start releasing in that one moment. Obviously, it's just the beginning of a whole new journey. But that's something that, a man can read a book, can listen to podcasts, and thank you, listeners, for listening to this podcast. We can do all those things, but there's something about being witnessed by other men who understand what we're going through. Our women don't understand what we're going through. Not really. Our fathers are, for most of us, we don't have fathers that also can have these conversations. So to be in spaces where other men can, who are alive to these conversations, to the burdens, to the struggles, and we can just sort of witness each other back. That alone is just magic for guys. There's something potent in that.
Yeah, I love that, Brian.
I love that too. There's magic in it. One of the pieces, before I go into the magic, I just want to say, yeah, man, how many of you guys have lost men along the way? Brothers in your life to suicide, to overdose? Right. Like all of us have.
All of us. Yep.
We all have. And that's the why. I mean, we're losing men. Men are dying in this world that don't need to be dying. I didn't know either of my grandfathers as a boy. My mom's father also committed suicide. That lives within me. And so in a part of my passing it on, it's like, man, if there's any amount of resource or support or just that open-hearted, all of you is welcome here, brother, no matter what you're carrying, no matter what it is, Jetty. We know those things. We know all the things, the addiction, depression, isolation, doesn't matter. It's like, can we create spaces for men to come to? And then the piece that we haven't really touched on is nature. Men getting connected to their hearts as a result of being connected to the earth, getting our feet back on the ground, like being under the stars again. So many of our brothers, and ancestors were connected to screens, we're in 4 walls. And there's a big piece of the initiatory and rites of passage work, which is really getting back into connection with the earth. I think it's really human. It's really healthy. And we talk about mental health, physical health, spiritual health. It's all of it. It's all of it. And so it's kind of like coming back to that totality of what it means, not only to be a man, but to be human. You know what I'm saying, guys? Like, do you feel that when you're working with your folks, like, oh, we can just be human again? And then the other piece that I want to say is play. So many of my brothers that I work with are not playing in their lives. And that's a question I ask them. When did you stop playing? Like, really consider that. For my brothers who are listening. When did you stop playing? Because on our weekends, we fight, we wrestle, and we play. And what that does is, of course, it connects us to that inner essence, that inner child, and it connects us to our why. It connects us to our why. And without that why, you get all the other shit. Once you're connected to your why, your purpose, your heart, and your brothers, that's when we're like, anything is possible. And that flip, I mean, it's priceless. It's absolutely priceless.
Well, Adam, and that play as men play. We don't know how to play as men play. A lot of us, I think, in our relationships, like to play with my wife, like I like to wrestle. I will fucking crush her. Her body can't take the pressure that I need to, I have to really let up, and she likes to be squeezed. But again, I have to hold back. Like when not that I can just, show up and try to crush a guy, but man, we can press up on each other and play in a way.
We can be met. We can be met by one another.
Yeah. Physically, in a physicality.
A good thing that the wrestling background gave me was I love to wrestle with my children. I have 3 boys and a girl, and my boys, we wrestle. We're on the trampoline every day. However, I meet so many fathers who are like, I don't play with my kids. I don't get on the ground. And that element of like, oh man, there's that much resistance. Yeah. Because of the burden, whatever it is.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you brought in play, Adam, because that was a big medicine for me. And I saw this in myself and in other men too. And you may resonate with this, with regards to this perspective, is when I was stepping into leadership, I thought play was something I needed to put aside. And I felt personally, the story I created was like, if I now play as a man, other men are going to look at me as a kid. And if I'm a kid, they're not going to trust me. So I'm just removing all type of play. I'm going to step into just being fully stoic, this kind of like hard dude, and forget about play. And that was this essence that I started to just put aside and forget about, which then was just creating this feeling of pressure, of overwhelm, and feeling like there wasn't this deliciousness, this juiciness for life. And it's funny because when I work with a lot of men, especially high performers, they ask me like, how do I create more presence? And I'm similar to your questions, like, are you playing? Right? Because as soon as we play, we don't look at the past or the present. We're in the past or the future. We're in the present moment. We're here in the now. And that connects us to this energy, to that space. And I also like to invite men to think about possibility as opposed to lack. And what's the fastest way to step into possibility and abundance? Play, right? We're moving our body, we're going into play, and that's raising the vibration to be in a state of abundance, which then allows us to lead from our truth, from possibility, and show up constantly looking at the future, as opposed to being driven from this place of fear, which is what I experienced whenever somebody told me, you ready to play? Yeah.
One of my favorite things to say is that if we don't laugh along the way, we won't survive the deep stuff. Right. And it's so easy to get seduced into that deep stuff. I think because that's one of the major voids that men have experienced for so long, is places to go and feel that depth. There's like a deep, dark cave inside of every man. And the moment that he gets to explore it, there's that temptation to go there because it feels like the most urgent piece. But if we can't laugh at ourselves, laugh at each other, just be silly and have full permission to be silly, then we really won't survive and we won't make it. I'm so glad that piece came in. And one of the things I wanted to touch on while we're all here is having the platform to speak into some of the dark, hard parts about being leaders in this work. I think you brought it up to my mind, Voy, talking about the responsibility of leadership. Because I know it's something that all of us take seriously. I see you guys, how you're doing that in your lives. Yeah. You take that seriously. And a lot of you guys are multidimensional men, and you can be light and loving and playful. But I know how hard it is to hold that torch and to lead the charge, to be the tip of the spear. So I think it's important for everybody listening to hear some of that too. So Brian, why don't you start us off there?
Yeah, that's such an alive question for me, because my wife and I, we've been married 10 years now, and the last couple of years, we've been really trying to have a child, and I've shared this publicly. This isn't a secret to anyone who knows my work, and my wife. You know, we've shared this publicly. So, and we're not able to have a child together, and it's been utterly devastating. You know, I cried 3 days when I first got that news about a year ago. And by the way, in the meantime, I'm enrolling men in a program called Elevate. Elevate at a time when I'm fucking in the ashes. You know, I'm like going through it. I can just still, like, we're over a year from that news. We've been processing it a long time, and it's still so alive in me. We've been in a deep grieving period. You know, holding both of those has been a really interesting challenge, and you know, the fear of similar, like what you just said, Voy. Like, if I really come clean, no one's gonna want to join my Elevate program when I'm in the fucking ashes, grieving. And yet, that's something that, you know, brings in meaningful income. It's the tip of the spear of the work that I do. So like holding, like, how do I get to just be fully human and still get to do this work in a way? It's like, you know, there's a lot of paradox to wrestle with. And I'm sure, like, you men have found, just the more human I allow myself to be, actually, the more men trust me. And I didn't know that early in the journey. I think a lot of men who don't do this work or haven't come into this are still, whatever, just feeling the things men feel. It's like, I don't get to be human. If I'm human, I'll be exploited. I'll be disrespected. I'll be dismissed. I'll be exiled, basically, right? I'll just, which is where we live anyway when we don't allow ourselves to come through. So, you know, as a leader, that's been such an interesting thing, just these last year and a half, to really work with. How do I bring, you know, the best of me when I'm in a really painful time of grieving and mourning? Fortunately, having other men help me carry that has been life-saving.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in here and, you know, first of all, man, I feel for you, Brian. I just love you, buddy. And to me, it points to the necessity, particularly for leaders, to have places where they're not leading. Like, that's been the blessing of my journey, is that from day one, I've had a space to not be the leader. And in fact, spent years not being a leader while being of service. And so for me, it's actually never felt that hard to be a leader, because it's always just been a result of, like, this is my work, like, for myself. I'm not doing this because I think I've got something that, you know, you need or he needs. I'm doing this for myself. And if you want to come to me and be a part of that journey, then great, let's go. Without that, man, this would be fucking hollow. This would get empty and hard fast.
Yeah,
and
well said.
If we don't have that, it does, and it will come crashing down quickly. So just wanted to put that in there.
Well said, man. So well said.
I might go off the back of that too, man, because for me, what personally has been my big challenge in leadership is that through leadership, I was getting a lot of validation from the men I was serving, their families, the communities, and everything. And when that was happening, I forgot to nourish myself, celebrate myself, and be proud of myself. And when I stepped back out of that leadership, let go of Conscious Man Brotherhood, I was having a third child, I went through a crisis of, well, who the fuck am I? So I bought so much into Blase, facilitated Blase leader, that's who I was, rather than my innate nature, that, man, it all came crashing down. And I went through these spirals of, I'm not doing enough for humanity and all this kind of stuff, because I bought into this identity that is so alluring with leadership, because I was putting myself at the forefront, like we all are, but I was buying into the Instagram highlights of that rather than its true essence and nature. So yeah, that was something that really challenged me to walk that line of humbleness within that leadership as well. But exactly what you said, man, like that's why I do jiu-jitsu. Go in as a white belt and get humbled again and again and again, and just like, oh, I just get to be held. Show me the way. And it's a lifelong journey too. Now, Adam, you had something, bro?
So many challenges along the way. Let's be real. Business and brotherhood don't mix. Straight up. That is the challenge point. If it was just brotherhood, if it was just the Knights Templar and we were funded by some gold mine, we could do the brotherhood all day. As we have created such a powerful culture and movement, holding so many relationships takes a toll. It's taken a toll on me. It's taken a toll on my family. When we've had to sever from a co-founder, and when the news of that was made public, I mean, this is in my home. This is in my wife's DMs. This is at the grocery store. People hit me up. I mean, the impact of holding so many, I'm talking about intimate relationships, the depths that we go in to do this work, it takes a toll. It's kind of the analogy of like the preacher who has all the time for the congregation, but his own family hasn't seen him. And I'm a present father. I work from home. I do my best, and the impact is truly felt within my home. And I think that's what I'm challenged with in this current moment where I'm at today. I'm like, I have to remember to prioritize myself within that this service work, right? There's selflessness, which a lot of young people get into. I'm going to give this all my love and passion. I'm going to be selfless and serve. And then there's selfishness, which is like, I got to take care of number one, and I got to take care of my family. And so having that balancing and really coming down the center with service that is both filling my cup and my family's cup and fulfilling that deep mission of like the service to humanity. This type of spiritual entrepreneurship, all the ways that it can look, it's not easy. And we don't want it if it's easy. It's not meant to be. It's meant to be something that's challenging, because that's how you know it's worthy, right? And so I would just say that, like, holding those relationships, and for me, right now the big message is keeping my inner circle super tight. And also, I love when earlier, Allan, you brought in the mentorship. Having mentorship for myself and my core team has been profound. It's one thing to even have one-on-one mentorship, but where can my whole team go? And creating like a king's court for all of the things that we're building and holding has been incredibly helpful.
Oh, yeah, man. I'll just echo everything that you shared, dude. The conflict, the difficulty of providing for ourselves and our families while aiming to provide such a really important service to humanity. It's like, who the fuck has done this before? Where is the example of it? And oh wait, it's us. It's now. And there's days where I resent that, truthfully, and there's days where I embrace it wholeheartedly. And there's more of the latter than the former. And I think that's what keeps us in the game. But I'm glad that you really shared that, because I think that's, at some point, I think that's something that we all face off with, right? How do we do that given the social tools that we've been given with currency and mortgages and all of these social agreements? Probably a bigger topic for another time, but I'm glad that you at least brought it to the forefront. I'd love to hear from Voy before I give a little bit of a closing prompt for everybody.
Yeah. So one of the things that really spoke to me was Blase speaking about leadership and how sometimes it can be this sense of seeking validation. And for me personally, has in the past, without a doubt, been super validating. And it kept this drive to continue leaning in more and more and more into leadership, where I felt like I was just carrying it all. And what I love that Allan brought into the space was, like, as leaders, we also need a space to let that go. And it's not the weight that breaks the man, it's how he carries it. And I feel like as leaders, we tend to carry a lot of that. So we need also spaces where we can let that go and come back to a place of feeling whole, refreshed, rejuvenated, because those challenges keep rising, keep coming up, and we need all the energy we can to continue breaking through. Because a lot of the times, the people who lead sometimes don't even see what's in front of them, right? They're just going forward and figuring it out along the way. It's kind of like the story of the entrepreneur, right? It's like, if you want to build a plane, just jump and figure out how to fly along the way. And that to me, what leadership is. It's like, sometimes I just got to figure it out. And when I carry a lot of shit, I need to figure out where a space is where I can let that go. And thankfully, I have an inner circle of men who I trust, and I can bring that in. And that just brings up this whole new level of inspiration, drive, motivation to continue moving forward.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Voy, because that brings me back to one of the questions I had earlier, right? Like, why are there so many men who experience men's work, but so few who step forward into leadership? Because it's just like you said, we all jumped out of a plane without a parachute, and we're screaming on the way down, like, ah, like looking around. But now we're looking around and like, oh, somebody else jumped out of the plane without a parachute. Oh, it's not me. I'm not the only one. Okay. Maybe we should hold hands and maybe we can, generate a little lift here and not hit the ground at high speeds. Great stuff, guys. I really appreciate all of you being here. Obviously there's so many more things to talk about. And, one of the things I really hope that this conversation does is propel us into more conversations, whether we record them and share them with the public or not, to unify our efforts more than they already have. Cause I do consider every one of you men here an ally already. And I hope that you feel the same way about me. But for us to continue to accomplish our mission, I know that we're going to have more of these allied conversations and efforts. So yeah, let's let this be fanning the embers of that unified effort. And to close it out, I'd like to hear from each one of you guys real briefly. What is one clear snapshot of the future that you can see when you close your eyes that will indicate that we've done it? We succeeded. We accomplished our mission, right? Like we did what we came here to do in being the leaders of this charge. Again, as quickly, I want to try and get you guys out of here on time. So as quickly as you can.
Easy for me. I said this to one of my men in a session this morning. It's it won't happen in my lifetime, but it's we don't need to do this any work because men are resourced in their lives. They're connected to every man has an inner circle of 3 to 5-ish other men that he's regularly meeting with, regularly gathering with, that he can say anything to, be himself with, be held by, like that is the norm on the planet. We're done. We get there. We men can move on to other work. I'm out.
Absolutely. The goal of Sacred Sons is so that we don't have to have a Sacred Sons. It's just embedded in the culture of what it means to be a man. And the way to do that, I will be satisfied when this is in the educational backbone of our communities. Of the frameworks are already there. This is relational jujitsu. I want to see it in every yoga studio, every jujitsu gym, men gathering, and then in the education, so that our young men, our young women are getting trained up for how to relate to one another as human beings on this planet. With that, thank you, Jetty. Thank you, brothers. Until then, until next time.
Hells yeah.
Yeah, man. I was exactly that, Adam. When men's work is mainstream, it's no longer called men's work. It just is. These like kids leaving school, they have the 2 cornerstones of manhood locked in, their values and their vision at such a young age. Before they're 18, they know this stuff that we've learned at 30 or 40 years old. I think that's when we know, when it becomes mainstream. And it's happening just by our kids listening, like, hey, daddy's on the podcast with the men's team. Just that conversation, just through our AB, just say, hey, dad's got a men's team, dad's got a men's coach, dad's doing this. My little boy says to me so many times, "Oh, it's just one of your brothers, Dad." Yeah, man, he's 6.
Oh,
that's man. It's
love
dope.
that.
You got,
Yeah. For me, it's kind of simple. It's just like when we look around and instead of seeing oceans of uninitiated men, we see oceans of initiated men. Like that to me will mean we've succeeded. And in the meantime, if just one man gets his life in order and like finds peace and freedom in his inner world and his immediate outer world, that to me is enough.
Yeah, I love what you guys brought here in Blaze. I want to piggyback off you because you spoke about mainstream and the culture. And one of the visions that I have for this work is I love when I see young boys say like, oh, I want to be like Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan, which is amazing. But I see the future of this work being so popular and so embedded in the culture that little boys are being like, I want to be like Adam Jackson, or I want to be like Jetty Azuma, or I want to be like Blase Grinner, where they get to really step into being this embodiment of the masculine role and be excited to become that and bring that forward to their communities, their families, and ultimately the world.
Well, I already want to be like you when I grow up, Voy, and every one of you men. So we're getting there fast. I think it's really cool that we all had the same answer to this question, essentially, right? The mission of Rising Man is that we become obsolete someday. I don't want to repeat what's already been said, but on a personal level, when I watch my son cross the threshold for his initiation into manhood, when I get to see my nephews circling up, unprovoked by myself or anyone else, they're choosing that for themselves. That'll be it. And I've seen it when I close my eyes. I'm sure you guys see it when you close your eyes too. So cheers to that. Right. To that point on the horizon, that Everest that we are climbing together. I'm grateful for you men taking a pause from your ascent to sit down and talk about how the climb has been, how it's going, what made you decide to climb in the first place, and to keep fighting the good fight. Thank each and every one of you, and I look forward to the next conversation that we all get to share.